March 19th, 1941. The River Clyde, Scotland. The wind howled through the half-lit dockyards of Glasgow, rattling corrugated metal and whistling through cranes like the voice of the North Sea itself. Sparks flew from welding torches, hissing as they met the damp night air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another British merchant ship had gone under, torpedoed by a German U-boat. No survivors. In the Clydebank shipyard, men worked in silence, broken only by hammer blows and the grinding wail of steel plates being cut. It was the night shift. The forgotten army. They weren't soldiers, but their battle was every bit as real. Harry McDougall, 42, foreman welder, leaned on the hull of a half-built cargo ship, the Empire Starling. His face was a map of soot and fatigue. They hit 3 more off the coast of Ireland, someone muttered nearby. Harry didn't look up. He just said, "Then we finish this one tonight." At that moment, the Clyde wasn't just a river. It was Britain's lifeline. Across the Atlantic, convoys of food and munitions were being hunted by Admiral Donitz's wolf packs. German U-boats operated in packs of 6, 8, sometimes 12, circling convoys like predators. By early 1941, they had sunk over 1 million tons of shipping. Britain was an island under siege, not from bombers, but from the deep. The Admiralty's reports were grim. Flour, tea, and sugar were being rationed more tightly each week. London had just 40 days of wheat left. If the shipyards stopped, even for a night, the nation might starve. Inside Shed 47, floodlights glared down on an incomplete hull section. Dozens of men climbed over scaffolding, welding seams, fitting rivets, tightening bolts until their hands bled. They worked 12-hour shifts with barely a meal between. Meat pies gone cold. Tea turned to sludge. At midnight, the foreman's whistle cut through the din. Another section rolled into position, glowing orange from heat. Harry and his crew guided it in like surgeons, every strike timed, every gesture practiced. He didn't see his wife or kids for weeks, but when the night fell and the floodlights came on, this steel, this ship, became his family. The Clyde was alive with motion, cranes swinging, hammers clanging, diesel engines growling as tugs maneuvered hulls into place. Each sound was defiance, a mechanical heartbeat against Hitler's blockade. As dawn approached, a low fog crept from the river. The shift didn't slow. Workers poured coffee from tin mugs, eyes bloodshot, uniforms soaked in oil. When the siren wailed from across the yard, the Luftwaffe inbound. They didn't move. "We've got no time to run," someone muttered. The first bomb landed near the quay, shaking the earth. Shrapnel rattled against steel, but no one left their post. The Empire Starling would sail in 11 days, if she survived the dockyard raids. The night shift had one order: finish her before the sea swallowed another convoy. March 23rd, 1941. North Atlantic, 200 miles west of Ireland. Convoy HX-112 cut through a black ocean under a moonless sky. 38 merchant ships plowed eastward, carrying Canadian wheat, American oil, and Norwegian fish, the lifeblood of a starving Britain. Beneath them, shadows moved. The German U-boat pack Preen had been stalking them for hours. Commander Otto Kretschmer, Silent Otto, aboard U-99, adjusted his periscope and whispered to his crew, "Zwei Ziele, beide beladen, Feuer 1, Feuer 2. Torpedoes streaked through the dark. Seconds later, 2 ships erupted in flame, their oil cargo painting the sea with fire. Men screamed as the Atlantic swallowed them whole. In London, the War Cabinet received the news by dawn. 2 tankers gone, another cargo ship missing. Churchill's private secretary wrote in his diary, "The PM fears the island will be strangled before summer." But back in the Clyde and in Belfast, the night shifts didn't stop. In the Harland and Wolff yards, where the Titanic had once been built, the skeleton of another ship rose, the Empire Wave. She was a standard cargo steamer, 10,000 tons, built under the new emergency program. No luxuries, no polish, just speed and steel. To the workers, every ship had a name, but also a purpose. They weren't just metal hulls, they were veins through which Britain's survival flowed. The welders at Harland and Wolff worked double shifts. The riveters in Glasgow sometimes slept beside the hulls. Women, too, had joined in. Canary girls, with yellowed skin from munitions dust, now handling welding torches and cranes. Their hair tied under grease-stained scarves. In mess halls, the radio murmured news of sinkings and shortages. Eggs, gone. Butter, gone. Bread rationed tighter. But in the shipyards, hope was measured in inches of hull completed and bolts turned. On March 25th, another night air raid struck Belfast. The sirens screamed as the Luftwaffe's Heinkel bombers appeared over the docks. "Hit the cranes! Hit the dry docks!" their commander barked over the radio. Explosions tore through the shipyard. Hangars shredded. Fires roared. But the hull of Empire Wave stood unbroken. Amid the chaos, one worker, Mary Campbell, refused to leave her post. She was only 23, a welder's assistant, face smeared with soot. When a blast shattered the glass panels of the tool shed, she threw herself over the torch valves to prevent an explosion. "We're not letting them stop her!" she yelled through the smoke. The men around her cheered, then went right back to work. When morning came, the yard was a graveyard of twisted steel, but also a monument of defiance. Empire Wave's hull gleamed with new weld seams, scarred but alive. Word spread across the British Isles. They hit the yards, but the ships still sail. In Berlin, Admiral Dönitz's intelligence officers noticed something unsettling. Despite record sinkings, the number of new ships leaving Britain's docks was increasing. The night shifts had become the Royal Navy's secret weapon, unarmed, unseen, and unstoppable. April 1st, 1941, Clydebank, Scotland. A thin drizzle turned to sleet as sirens screamed across the river valley. The night sky pulsed orange, not dawn, but fire. The Luftwaffe had returned. Hundreds of civilians huddled in basements as over 200 bombers descended on the Clyde. Their target? The John Brown shipyard, where the merchant vessel Empire Starling stood nearly finished. Over the next 2 nights, 528 bombers dropped 1,000 tons of explosives on the town. It would later be known as the Clydebank Blitz. Inside the yard, men and women refused to abandon the slipway. "Keep welding!" Harry McDougall shouted over the roar of the sirens. "If she sinks here, the whole island sinks with her!" Bombs landed in the river, sending tidal waves of mud over the deck. Sparks from welding torches danced against the storm of fire raining down. One blast threw Harry clear across the deck, his helmet rolling into the smoke. His ears rang, his arm burned, but he climbed back up, dragging a steel plate into position. Nearby, a crane operator named Jack Ritchie refused to evacuate. He kept swinging his crane over the dock, lifting armor sections and dropping them into place while the air shimmered from explosions. By morning, half the yard was in ruins. Over 35,000 civilians were homeless, 528 dead. But the Empire Starling still stood, blackened, dented, but intact. That afternoon, Churchill's telegram reached the docks. "The Clyde burns, but its spirit remains unbroken. Britain lives because you endure." That message was passed hand to hand, copied in chalk on the wall of the shipyard canteen. The workers didn't cheer. They just nodded and went back to work. By mid-April, a rhythm had emerged. Every night, the torches lit the darkness. Women carried coffee and tins of condensed milk through the yard. The foreman counted rivets, the apprentices patched holes, and the cranes swung like metronomes over a war symphony. Across the channel, German reconnaissance photographs puzzled analysts. How could the British shipyards still be producing? One officer wrote in disbelief, "Bombs do not stop them. They seem to work in the ashes." On April 21st, Empire Starling rolled down the slipway. Thousands watched from the riverbank. Welders, children, widows wrapped in scarves. The ship's hull hit the water with a roar that drowned out the sirens. Workers wiped their faces, hands trembling. Some cried. Harry stood at the dock edge, arm bandaged, and whispered, "Now she'll feed them." That single ship could carry 10,000 tons of grain, enough to feed 500,000 people for a week. But more importantly, it carried a message across the Atlantic. Britain would not break. As Empire Starling steamed westward, escorted by destroyers, its engines roared against the waves like a heartbeat, the sound of survival. In Washington, American newspapers printed photographs of the launch. The headlines read, "Britain builds through the Blitz." In Berlin, Dönitz received reports that more new ships were appearing in convoys than he had sunk. His submariners called it Die Nachtarbeiterflotte, the night workers' fleet. But for the men and women in Clydebank and Belfast, it wasn't glory or vengeance that drove them. It was the thought of milk for children, bread for breakfast, and the belief that their sweat could keep an island alive. When asked years later what he remembered of that night, Harry said only this: "We weren't heroes. We just refused to stop." The night shift had saved Britain from starvation, not with rifles or bombs, but with hammers, torches, and the will to keep the lights burning. May 12, 1941. North Atlantic. Convoy SC-30. 30 merchant ships braved the gale, plowing through mountains of gray water. Among them was the Empire Starling, her hull still smelling faintly of fresh paint and smoke from the Clydebank Blitz. She carried Canadian wheat, powdered milk, and thousands of crates of American tinned goods, precious calories that Britain desperately needed. Aboard her bridge, Captain Samuel Sam Hargreaves, a merchant mariner from Liverpool, stared through salt-flecked glass at the black horizon. His crew of 36 was a mix of veterans and shipyard volunteers. A few had even helped weld her frame weeks before. None of them had sailed a convoy before. The wireless crackled. "U-boat sighted astern. Keep formation." Every man on deck froze. Somewhere out there, beneath those waves, the hunters waited. The escorting destroyer HMS Bulldog fired depth charges that rolled off her stern like iron barrels of thunder. The sea boiled. Moments later, an explosion ruptured the surface. Oil and wreckage burst upward. A U-boat had been hit. One down, but more were coming. For 3 nights, the convoy endured torpedoes, storms, and sleepless terror. The Empire Starling's engines groaned, her hull shuddering as she pushed through the waves. The men barely spoke. Each knew that if they faltered, an entire island went hungry. By dawn on the 4th day, fog settled thick over the sea. The ships crept forward, horns blaring. Somewhere beyond the mist, the British Isles waited. Then, land. A faint outline at first, then cliffs, gray and solid as salvation itself. A cheer went up across the deck. Even Captain Hargreaves allowed himself a weary smile. The Empire Starling had survived. When she docked at Liverpool, longshoremen swarmed her decks. Every crate unloaded was a victory. Flour for bakeries, meat for hospitals, milk powder for children. The harbor sirens wailed not in alarm, but in triumph. News spread fast. The ship built under fire had made it through. Workers in Clydebank wept when they heard. Some laughed. Others lit cigarettes and stared at the river where she had once stood on the slipway. It wasn't just a ship that reached port. It was proof that the night shifts had held the line. In Whitehall, Churchill read the Admiralty's report. Another convoy arrived safely, Starling among them. He leaned back in his chair, cigar smoldering, and muttered, "So long as they can build, we can endure." The phrase spread through the shipyards like scripture. It was printed on posters, carved into wood, and whispered during blackouts. So long as we can build, we can endure. By the year's end, British yards were launching a new ship every 3 days. The night shifts never slowed, never slept. Even when bombs fell again in May and June, even when families were buried in rubble, the cranes kept swinging. And for every ship that sailed, thousands more survived. Food supplies stabilized. The blockade faltered. The island did not starve. Years later, when asked what had saved Britain in 1941, radar, Enigma, or the RAF, historian A.J.P. Taylor would answer simply, the men and women who built in the dark. The Clyde and Belfast never forgot those nights when the sea went silent, when ships rose from the ashes faster than the enemy could sink them. If you stand by the river today, you can still hear it. The distant clang of steel, the hiss of torches, the heartbeat of a people who refused to give in. The night shift that saved Britain from starvation never marched in parades, never fired a shot. But their hands built the bridge between hunger and hope.